afternoon, and I want to welcome Congress member Rashida Tlaib, along with Clovis Foster and Anthony Brinson. And we're here to ask for the help of the public. We are very concerned that the Census Bureau did not make a good faith effort to count the number of people in the city of Detroit. And in anticipation of that, we're gathering facts to just prove whether it's true or it's not true. But the reason that we're concerned started at the beginning. Even before the census process started, for the first time in my lifetime, there was no census office in the city of Detroit. The Census Bureau cut their budget, scaled it back, and there was no Detroit office nor Detroit focus. They ran it out of Chicago. That told us right off the bat the commitment of the federal government to make sure this city was counted accurately. And then we had a very intense effort led by Vicki Cavari and the Congresswoman and a lot of other community members, because in the midst of COVID, we needed to get the highest return rate possible. And we actually succeeded, in spite of COVID, in spite of no Detroit office, in having virtually the same census return rate as 10 years ago, what's called the self-response rate. So in the first phase, you get sent your census forms in the mail or online, and you answer them, and everybody's rate is measured. We know historically that black and brown Americans are less likely to fill out a census than Caucasians. Just the truth, been proven over and over. I've talked about it before. I was a census taker in 1980 in Ann Arbor. I don't think a whole lot has changed. And so to get accurate counts in cities, it takes more of an effort, not less. And this is what is so disturbing. So the original self-reporting period ends, and the Census Bureau goes into something they call non-response follow-up. The non-response follow-up period is what determines whether cities are counted accurately in this country. So in 1980, when I was a student in Ann Arbor, I did non-response follow-up on the blocks of Ann Arbor. Nothing's changed in 40 years, except I had a clipboard and a pen, and today they have electronic tablets. But the process is exactly the same. As a census worker, you go knock on the doors of the houses that have not responded, and you go back 3, 4, 5 times, or you can ask neighbors how many people live in that house. The non-response follow-up is the single most critical aspect of the census process to get accurate counts in cities. So the Census Bureau decided it was so important, they were going to start early on their non-response follow-up in critical communities. And so they started on July 16th with a handful of communities needed extra attention. None of them were in Michigan, but they did start on July 16th, sending the non-response follow-up to Beckley, West Virginia, to make sure they were counted. Then in July 23rd, the Census Bureau said, we're going to start again on cities that need attention and follow-up. No cities in Michigan. In fact, the closest city to us that started on July 23rd was Evansville, Indiana. The Census Bureau wanted to make sure Evansville was accurately counted. August 6th, finally, the U.S. Census Bureau decides that Michigan is important enough, we're going to send people into the streets in non-response follow-up. They picked 2 areas, Lansing and Oakland County. That was it. Now, non-response follow-up is to get the areas that need the most help. At the time they sent folks in, Lansing already had a 70% return rate. Oakland County had an 80% return rate, the highest in the state of Michigan. The Census Bureau decided to send their most intense effort early into counting people in Oakland County who already had the highest return rate to make sure that every one of them was counted. Finally, on August 11th, Detroit and the rest of America got added in. And at the time, the announcement was that they would work through October 31st because it was going to take that long to do the non-response follow-up. As you can imagine, I was already very angry at what looked to me like an intentional strategy by the Census Bureau to not count Detroit. But when they started, and they started going in, we started hearing stories that said we got a bunch of positions that aren't filled. People aren't getting out in the street. The Census Bureau wouldn't disclose any of this to us. They wouldn't tell us how many enumerators were there. They wouldn't tell us how many houses they'd gotten to. But here's what we did know. The publicly reported information, which is called the self-count, went up faster in every city in America during the non-response follow-up than it did in the city of Detroit. Cleveland was well behind us when the non-response follow-up started. Cleveland went way past us, which suggests that there were people in the streets working in these other cities in a far more diligent way than they were in the city of Detroit. And so we were continuing to raise objections. Finally, around October 1st, it looked like we were making some progress. We were hearing stories that people were being sent in from other parts of the state to actually get into the neighborhoods. We thought, okay, they have done an abysmal effort at this all along, but at least in October they'll get caught up. And then the Supreme Court, on October 15th, shut the process down. And throughout most of this time, the publicly reported information indicated the non-response follow-up in Detroit was behind the rest of the state. Now, magically, it's all at 100%. It's amazing how that happened as soon as the court ruling came out that they decided it was all concluded. And the truth of the matter is, they started later in Detroit, they understaffed Detroit, and they shut it down early for one reason. There appears to be a national strategy to undercount cities, and it appears to be hitting Detroit most effectively. Now, I may turn out to be wrong about this. When the actual count comes out, maybe it will be accurate. We don't know. Here's the difference. 10 years ago, when the city was undercounted, everybody was stunned. This time, we're not waiting. There is a legal process to challenge an undercount. And with the assistance of Congressmember Rashida Tlaib, we're going to gather the evidence now, and we're going to follow the evidence wherever it shows. And so what we're asking today is this. We need information from census workers who worked in Detroit or surrounding areas who are willing to come forward to just tell us the truth of what happened. Were you out working full days? Did you have the appropriate lists of what houses to go to? Did you have proper supervision? Did you have your tablets? All we're asking for is the people to come forward and tell us the truth. And I would be very happy to find out that I'm wrong. But all evidence I have right now suggests there was an intentional undercount effort here. And so we have a telephone number, 866-20-COUNT, and this is for census workers, people who worked as enumerators or supervisors for the Census Bureau this year. We just want to hear the truth. We don't want to hear from an average citizen about somebody who was rude to me or anything like that. This is purely building the case that the effort in Detroit was unprofessional at counting compared to other cities. And so if you have that kind of information and you're willing to step forward and just tell us the truth, please call. That's going to be 50% of our strategy. The other 50% is there is congressional oversight of the Census Bureau. And we are very fortunate to have one of the most vigorous Congress members at oversight and somebody who has been focused on this issue on day one. And so while we are going to be preparing at the city level a potential appeal if we are in fact undercounted, I also expect there is going to be an effort at the federal level to make the Census Bureau accountable for a full and complete census. And with that, I'll turn it over to my partner in this, Congressmember Rashida Tlaib.
Thank you so much, Mayor Duggan, and I can't stress to you this partnership and how important it is that we both agree that Detroit deserves to be counted fairly. Any shortcuts, as we all know and saw during the pandemic, will impact our families for over a decade, and some of that impact is irreparable. One of the more important functions that the census serves is helping our government decide where more than $1.5 trillion of federal money should go each year. And one of the key things I want to stress to you all in this partnership, and it's very important, is that we do have a current administration that has already been given a number of subpoenas, a number of requests for evidence in regards to the census, because other communities are seeing the same exact thing, short changes, processes being implemented unfairly, and so that it's really important that all the census workers that are listening to this, even if it was a short time, you know, information that you might think or it might not be relevant, it actually is relevant, to please come forward, that we will protect you. This is not about you specifically in getting hired or any of those processes. We want to help you with that if you were treated unfairly in that sense. But we also really want to know, what were you tasked to do? And if you were in Detroit, where did they send you? What are the hours? And again, this is important because I know I work tirelessly, as the mayor knows, and we both do. We see what happens when we don't have the resources to take care of our families. And so we won't allow, you know, we see the shortened deadlines with the cutbacks on census operations. I told the mayor when I spoke to him yesterday, Mayor, I knew something was wrong when they cut that many regional offices. And we know communities like Detroit, we need the direct human contact. Of course, we can do it safely, but we need that direct human contact. That second layer is so important to communities like Detroit, where we can actually go door to door and talk to those that didn't respond in the first place. So again, we can't allow further impacts. And what I mean by that is, if it's being reported a certain thing actually went through the process and it didn't, then of course, we have an action here to making sure that we hold the federal government accountable. And so I represent, again, one of the poorest congressional districts in the country. We are literally the community that will be directly impacted when we aren't fully counted. As a member of the House Oversight and Reform Committee, I am committed in this partnership and holding this administration accountable and ensuring that all residents and communities were counted accurately and no process was shortchanged. And that means asking those tough questions necessary to make sure that no one, again, was left behind and no one is left out of this year's count that will live with us for a decade. I look forward to working with our mayor and local leaders. Of course, I want to deeply thank the Detroit Census Committee, who really worked tirelessly hard to build partnerships with our nonprofit organizations, my office, and others. Thank you so much for all of the work that you're doing. We want to make sure that work counts. We want to make sure that, again, that they all, on the federal side, also worked as tirelessly as we did to making sure that we put everything forward in ensuring a fair count. Again, know that you have a partner in me, and please know that when you do call this number, we are on your side. We just want to be able to get this information. And please, you know, this is about showing up for our neighborhood. This is about showing up for our communities. So please call this number if you worked for the United States Census, and if you worked in Detroit, show up for each other. We need to make sure that this current administration doesn't change us, because again, we would have to live with this count for a decade. Thank you so much again, Mayor, and thank you for the courage and leadership of all those. And I know that you're out there listening to this. Know that your courage inspires me to work harder. So again, I appreciate you calling. I appreciate your partnership in making sure we hold hold the administration accountable. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you, and the Congress member is right. Vicky Cavari and the Detroit Census Committee just did phenomenal work against all odds. We just want to be counted fairly, and to give you a sense of the information we're looking for. And all I want is for people to call and tell the truth about their experience. But we've had a couple individuals who worked for the census this year who had the courage to come forward and talk about what they've seen. And I've asked a couple of them to come here to give you a sense of why I am very concerned there wasn't a good faith effort by the Census Bureau to count the city of Detroit. And first, I'd like to ask Clovis Foster to talk about what you did on the census and what your experience was.
Thank you, Mayor. Yes, my name is Clovis Foster, and I work with the city as a city census captain, and I also was with the federal government as an enumerator. The problems that I had was when I was overlooked as getting hired, and I already had my ID and fingerprinted. I also got the wrong ID number to my phone, so I couldn't get my cases right away. Also, when I went out, we had to do proxies right away, because if you didn't get an answer, they put proxies on it, and we had to go do them right away. That was something that we had to do by ourselves. There were people quitting as fast as they were hiring. They were very unorganized. We had to go out by ourselves. We also, the input wasn't updated. To me, it seemed like it wasn't updated because people were going back out, enumerators were going back out to people that I have done and answered. They had answered the census question, but they had already sent somebody else out there. So I think it was, as far as proxies, I think it was unsafe because we had to go out by ourselves. And it was just very unorganized. I didn't get cases till like sometimes 3, 5 o'clock in the evening. It was just, you had to wait all day, keep syncing your phone to see if you get cases or not. I would put my time in from 10 to 8 o'clock. I would be sitting home all day, may not get no cases at all. So it was just really very unorganized. I almost quit myself because we just couldn't get. Then my manager, he left. My supervisor didn't get back with me right away when I had problems. It was just really unorganized.
So, Ms. Foster, talk a little bit about the mechanics of this. So you'd go on the clock at 10 in the morning because you were ready to go out and hit doors as an enumerator. And there were days when you were sitting waiting at 10 o'clock and would not get any addresses to hit until 3 or 4 in the afternoon?
Yes, sometimes 5 o'clock in the afternoon.
So if you think about this, we had a 50% self-response rate, which means there were 100,000 households in the city of Detroit that the Census Bureau had not been counted. And so, did they give you any explanation for why it took them most of the day to get you some addresses to go to?
Well, my supervisor told me that we put our availability in. It doesn't mean that we're going to get the cases at that time. So we have to wait and keep syncing our phones to see if we get
And
cases.
did your other workers have the same kind of experience?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
And so these are the kinds of stories. So you think about what you got. You got a short window period to basically get through. You got, I don't know, 6, 7, 8 weeks to get through 100,000 households in this city that you know have not responded. You know the addresses, you've got the data. And so instead of having an army of trained folks out morning and night to get it done in this window, these are the kinds of stories we were hearing over and over. And these are the kind of stories we need to document. And they were not stories we were hearing from other areas. And to add to his experience is another employee of the U.S. Census Bureau this year, Mr. Anthony Brinson.
Thank you, Mayor. So I've been all things Detroit. My name is Anthony Brinson, and throughout the past several months, like Ms. Foster, working with the Detroit Census and knowing the hard work that they all put in to prepare, and then working with the U.S. Census, and I just found it, I had the unique perspective of working in Macomb County on the U.S. Census. And once they finally got it rolling, they were up and running to the point where they were able to offer us some other work in different areas if we wanted to, and Detroit was one of those. And so me being, born and raised in the city, sure, let me go help out. And what I found was that when I reached out to some people that I knew that were working the Detroit Census, they hadn't even started yet. I mean, we were maybe 2.5 weeks in, 3 weeks in probably, and, rolling. And towards the end, when it was time to go to Detroit, I had several people tell me that they hadn't received any cases, that they, were waiting on work. And so, me going out and trying to find the hub, there was no one that could tell me where the hub was, who to speak to directly, and who was in charge of these cases. And I just, it upset me just knowing behind the scenes the work that was put in, and not to be able to get rolling and get every citizen in Detroit counted. It was pretty upsetting.
So, Mr. Brinson, when you were acting as an enumerator in Macomb County, did you have trouble getting your cases for the day?
There was, initially the rollout was rough as well, not just Detroit. Once they got going though, that it wasn't a problem. I mean, I would sync my phone, as Ms. Foster was saying, the cases would show up, I would go out and work, and everything was fine.
So you were able to spend your days efficiently counting in Macomb County.
I was.
How was the supervision there?
Supervision was rough at first. Again, I mostly probably due to COVID-19, but they switched supervisors several times. Again, once they got in place, it would roll smooth for about a week or so, and then there was some turnover, people quitting as well, but not nearly as bad as the stories I heard in the city of Detroit.
And so this is what we're looking for. We're going to put together the truth. And if you have a different story, if you were an enumerator in Detroit and everything worked efficiently and you got your cases first thing in the morning and your supervisor responded, and it was, call and tell us that. We just want to know the truth. But if, as I suspect, that what we're going to find is a far more disorganized and unprofessional operation in Detroit, then when the count is released at the end of December, if we are undercounted, we as a city need to have the objective documentation of the professionalism of the count. And so we've got 2 months, basically, to put together our case. And if I'm surprised and they got it right, that's great. I know from DTE, because we're getting reports of households in Detroit with utility hookups, we know the population is up. There's no question about that. If they got the count right, that's great. But we cannot be scrambling in December if they've got it wrong. So if you want to help this city get counted for the next decade in funding for school lunches, in funding for Medicaid and for a lot of other services, and you just want to call and tell us the truth, please call 866-20-COUNT. Tell us your story at working for the Census Bureau this year in Detroit or in the surrounding areas. And if you want us to keep you confidential, we will. If you're willing to step forward in a case, let us know that. But either way, we just want to put together a true picture. And with that, we'll take any questions. And bless you, Ms. Foster.
Hello, everyone. John Hewitt from WWJ. Mayor or whoever can answer best on this legal process of appeal, can you be more specific in regard to what entity you'd be appealing to? And do you have to wait, if I heard you correctly, until the results actually physically come out to file a formal appeal?
Well, we've joined a number of other cities in asking that the count be reinstated. I think every city in America agrees with that. But there's a point at which, they're saying today, December 31st, they'll release counts for every city in the country. There is then an appeal process in which you can say, here's why I believe your count was inaccurate, and get it adjusted, and it then is filed after December 31st. We could go ultimately a litigation route, but there's actually an administrative appeal process first. And so we are going to follow the law. If we believe the count comes in inaccurately, we are going to follow the administrative appeals process with the documentation we obtain. If we don't feel like that works, we will go to court. But you can't do anything if you don't have the facts. And so we're today working together to get the.
So I'm expected to put a request for information in regards to what resources were dispensed in Detroit and help. And again, this is not just about, appeal. This is about making sure that all the processes were implemented properly. I mean, it sounds like no matter, intentional or not, and it sounds to me that an appeal process is also about, capacity, resources, whatever the process is. I mean, this is what the U.S. Census is supposed to be built for. And they're supposed to go through this, various procedures. Again, I've talked to a couple of my colleagues on House Oversight Committee, and we're looking into what, we can do to push back and say to Department of Commerce and getting that information back from them of what exactly did happen in a city like Detroit. And I know a number of my colleagues are also looking in their communities. But, again, it's his request for evidence and information. And like the mayor said, I think he's more confident, and maybe it's right, but I truly believe, just as a person that's out in the community, very little did I see canvassers and people out, doing the U.S. Census count for the second phase. Very rarely do I see it. And I'm out, and many of us, not like I remember in 2010, it was a little bit different there because we physically saw people early on. But I think it's really important to know that the mayor and myself want to do our due diligence. The appeal process is available for a reason. If we feel like the federal government didn't dispense enough resources or processes, didn't implement it accurately or fairly, then we have a right to appeal and push back and say, sorry, but you did it wrong and you have to fix it.
Appreciating, the last question for me is, in this political climate in particular, but I've heard you hedge a couple of times in regard to, we think this is, not 100% sure. I guess, would you suspect potential incompetence? Would you suspect COVID-related implications? Would you suspect bad intentions? Do you even care to go there? It would be my
I mean,
question.
like I told the mayor, we've already held the head of Commerce in contempt because of not responding to various questions in regards to census early on. Because I want you to know, prior to the pandemic, there were issues in hiring up. There were issues in various cuts already in communities like ours. So just for folks to know the history here, this was already something that was in motion prior to the pandemic that was already alarming many of my colleagues on House Oversight Committee and others. And that's why, if you look at the number of hearings we had with the person that heads the census count, it was very, very disturbing to see that they cut regional offices and didn't dispense or didn't begin hiring quick enough. We noticed the difference in how much they were dispensing in resources. So I think very important to know there seems to be something that happened prior to, and it continues. So yes, it could have been somewhat pandemic related, but we also want to make sure there wasn't ill intention. But even if it was a lack of resources, you can't say you report to the mayor or to myself that you did this, but you actually didn't. Because that, to me, that's unfair. And again, we want to do our due diligence. So I'm going to use my position on House Oversight Committee to gather that information and let the residents of the city of Detroit know that we did our due diligence to make sure that they were counted accurately, because that's our job and our responsibility. And I think the mayor is right to go to people that were supposedly on the ground in Detroit to gather that information, because we're not going to get it from this administration directly. And so we again, have to do our due diligence.
Yeah, I think the people on the ground in Detroit were trying honestly to do their best.
That's right.
I don't have any question about that. My question is, if we had a 50% turnover rate in Detroit and a 20% turnover rate in Washtenaw County, what did that mean? If we had lists readily available at 10 in the morning in Washtenaw County, but in 2 or 3 in the afternoon in Detroit, so the time wasn't used efficiently, what does that mean? And so I'm not as much focused on whose fault it is. I am focused on, was the count done as thoroughly and professionally in Detroit as other parts of the state and other parts of the country? That's the evidence we're trying to gather. And I think the Congress member and I both feel the same way. We'll reach a conclusion after we see the facts. Right now, we're asking the public who knows, the members who worked here, to come forward and just tell us the facts.
Thank you.
Good afternoon, ML Elric, Detroit Free Press. In terms of counting people in Detroit, this has been a problem historically, and I remember vaguely when Detroit was headed under 1 million and Coleman Young challenged the census count. And I don't know if anybody's memory goes back that far, but it seemed to me that by challenging it, we were able to stay at 1 million for a certain amount of time. And I seem to remember Mayor Kilpatrick also challenging a census count and that enable us to stay at a higher number for some period of time. Does it work that way, or what happens if we think their number's off?
I don't think Mayor Kilpatrick actually served during a census count year, if I remember my years correctly. But there are a number of things that you could do. I knocked doors in 1980 in racially mixed neighborhoods in Ann Arbor and the non-response follow-up. There is no question that our residents of color are more distrustful of a government person on their door asking for information than Caucasian. That's true across the country. We know it. And the Census Bureau has known it, and the Census Bureau puts in additional measures to make sure everybody counts. And usually that means 4 or 5 door knocks to a house that has not responded. And then it involves potentially talking to neighbors. In some cases, when nobody answers the door, there's a method to impute the number of people. If you weren't a census person, you might have missed what Ms. Foster was saying about going right to proxies. What she was saying was they skipped the part where you knocked on the door 4 or 5 times, right? I mean, that's a really a disturbing,
Yes.
if that was the pattern, that they skipped the door-to-door visits and went to the so-called proxies asking a neighbor. If that shortcut was taken in a broad way in the city of Detroit, that calls into question the whole methodology. If Ms. Foster's the only person who experienced that, maybe it's not a problem. If a number of other people said, we never got to knock on the doors, we went straight to the proxies, that suggests a serious problem. Everything that I'm seeing says to me that there are alarm bells going off on the professionalism of this, and that's what we're talking about. And so, yes, there is a means to challenge. Mayor Young challenged successfully. In 2010, there was no effective challenge, but this time, we are going to be armed between Washington and the city of Detroit with the facts, and the facts are what they are, and if the facts show that we weren't counted fairly, we're going to appeal.
So in terms of procedurally, what you're talking about sounds like it would be different than challenging their count. You're actually challenging the process rather than saying, you say we have 700,000, we think we have 800,000.
So that's how you challenge the count. I mean, if the process were correct, the count would be perfect, right?
Right.
So that's how you challenge the count, is to point out deficiencies in the process that cause the count not to be accurate. We can't just say we think something different. And so if we can show a pattern of a less diligent or professional count effort in Detroit compared to other cities or states, we are in a very powerful position on an appeal. If it turns out they had the identical processes everywhere, we're not in the same position. So we're just trying to find out the facts.
Okay, so to go back to the Mayor Young example, he believed the city of Detroit still had 1 million people, and that's what he based his challenge on. If we think that we've been undercounted, how do we determine what we think our actual population is?
Well, I think we have a pretty good idea what it is, because DTE tells us every month exactly how many households have power. Not that every single household in the city has power, but the numbers they're showing us are significantly higher than what the Census Bureau says are in the city. And if you have an average number of people per household, you got a pretty good idea. We know for sure the number of households that are paying for power, and if they don't have that many households, we know they've missed. Now, are the households missed in areas of lower income, of areas of more apartments? Until we see the track-by-track data, we don't have the roadmap to the appeal. So you're asking me a number of things that by January I'm going to be very knowledgeable on, but today what I know for sure is this. If we do a lot of work and prepare the appeal and it turns out they got it right, we will have wasted a couple of months. If we don't do it and they got it wrong, it could cost this city tens of millions of dollars a year in needed aid for the next decade. So we are doing the work to prepare, and my guess is we're going to need it. I hope I'm wrong, but I think we're going to. That's what we're doing. We're just saying, just step up, tell us the truth, help us out.
And based on that DTE data and whatever else you have, maybe DWSD, other things like that, do you in your mind have a number that if the Census Bureau came back and said, Mayor Duggan, there are this many souls in Detroit, you'd say, that sounds about right to me?
So I know how many households there are. And so we'll look at the data, but I get data from DTE by zip code, by month. I've gotten it for the last 5 or 6 years. It absolutely tracks my experience being in these neighborhoods, knowing where vacant houses have filled in and the like. And so I'm confident that the data I'm seeing every month is accurate. We want to see their census tract and zip code data, and we'll measure it. So you're asking me to make judgments on something I haven't seen yet. So
I guess I'm just wondering, how many people do you think there are in Detroit?
again, I'm going to wait and see what their numbers look like and what our evidence looks like, but I'm not usually in the business of reaching a conclusion before I have facts.
But it sounds like you get this data on a regular basis from what you've been saying. So there must be some ballpark figure
Yeah.
in your mind.
So-
It sounds
so-
like you don't want to tell us, that's fine,
Yeah.
but But I'm just trying to
Yeah, I
figure out
mean,
if you.
there's so many
if you know.
factors. I think it's so hard when people try to apply certain formulas to Detroit, because I think of the neighborhood I grew up in Southwest Detroit, where I know the number of Latinos is much higher than what the census always says. Why? Because you look at the school population. You look at the fact that a third of Detroit public schools are Latino children. And so, and those are, again, many of our families, we undercount our children in the city. I mean, there's so many factors, ML. So I think it's really hard for us to share. And I know we're going to go beyond just the DTE bills. We have to go and look at school population. I mean, all of those things, I think is critically important. And so, the one important thing is, Ms. Foster obviously triggered us to say, wait, so, what do you mean they did that? That's not how they're supposed to do it. And so that gave us, a clue that we weren't going to just look away. We said, okay, well, there might be something there that is really important, because that means that we got undercounted. If they were using the proxies, that they were not actually dispensing the census workers as they were supposed to do that follow-up on the non-responders. So again, I think, kudos to the mayor's office and reaching out and saying, we got to do something about this and make sure and investigate that, again, the United States government did their due diligence and their responsibility to make sure everyone is counted.
Congresswoman, is there a remedy? Let's say we think the number's off. We're able to make our case with the anecdotal information provided by people who worked for the census. We're able to show they didn't put as many people here or have the offices they typically have. Is there a mechanism to put people back on the streets, to count those bodies that they missed, to find people who may be concerned that if they're counted, they'll be turned over to ICE? And, there's a whole new dynamic in 2020 we haven't seen before.
And look, the appeal process has piqued my interest, and right away, I told my team, we're going to learn what this process is as we're going through this. I'm going to learn everything. He knows I will, of what it takes and what does that mean. And I don't know if it's this another layer of dispensing. I've not heard of that. But I can tell you, I think, the responsibility for us is, look, Detroit residents want to make sure that they are getting their fair share of resources. That's all. This is, again, something that's done every decade, and they want to make sure that, again, they were treated equally to other communities. And it sounds to me, just looking at this, it's consistent from the Mayor Young days and on, that communities like ours are not treated equally to other communities. And I think we're not going to stand on the sidelines and say, that's okay, it's just how it is. We're going to say, no, you didn't do it right. You knew this is, and by the way, the federal government, myself, members of Congress, we dispensed more money through the U.S. Census to target hard-hitting, communities like ours. We said, look, we're going to give more because we want to basically invest and make sure that we do it even better, because this is hardest hit communities continue to not be counted properly. So the taxpayer dollars are being used. They have to be used properly. It can't be used unequally. Like, I really want to stress to you that, again, hearing just alone these two census workers, that alone, it piques our interest of like, wait, does this mean this was a pattern throughout the city of Detroit? And again, we have to make sure it's class sizes. It's, even during this pandemic, deciding where mobile testing investment is, deciding where we're going to do, more outreach to the uninsured. I mean, this is where they decide where to dispense resources, the federal government, and this is $1.5 trillion. And again, we have to do everything possible to make sure that we get our fair share.
And Your Honor, is there an opportunity to propose a remedy where you say, get more feet on the street to count people? Or is it like an arbitration where you say, we think there's 1 million, you think there's 500,000, and some in-between person says, the city made a better case than the feds?
Let me say this to you. The Congressmember and I are not always on the same side of every issue. We are on the same side in our obsession in preparing facts and analyzing legal options, and we will come in very thoroughly with the appropriate response. At times, there have been adjustments and imputements made just based on averages and efforts. Other times, they may do something else. But again, I'm not going to, until we actually have the facts to know whether there was a deficient count, I'm not going to start speculating on what a remedy would be. We need to know right now what the truth is. And I got to say this to you. If there was a significant pattern of what Ms. Foster is saying, of skipping the door-knocking phase and going straight to the proxy phase, we got a major issue. And right now, we just want to know Was that a widespread practice, or was that a few people? Today, we truly don't know. But when the first two people you run into tell us these stories, there's reason to investigate further.
Sure, and presumably you'd find more people at home during a pandemic than you would in any other census period because we're all locked down. So I hear what you're saying there. As we go into 2021, if you find the evidence that you need to battle this, do you have any assurance for Detroiters that you will be the mayor in 2021 to lead this fight? Or if you're asked to serve in a Biden administration, will we have a different mayor taking this to the Census Bureau?
There is no circumstance under which I'm going to Washington DC in 2021. I
And I
have,
will still be there, no matter what.
and I was about to say, I have somebody who represents us more than effectively already. They don't need me, but no, there is no circumstance under which I'm going to Washington in 2021. And as far as my plans, we'll talk about those in December.
So that sounds pretty unequivocal. You do not plan to serve in an administration?
I will not go to Washington DC in 2021.
Okay, or 2022?
Or
Okay.
2022. Washington DC is not, I would have never left the medical center to go to Washington. I love the city of Detroit. I came here to do what I'm doing, to work for the people of the city of Detroit. I'm not going to Washington.
Okay, thank you very much.
Are we done, or?
We just got one question from Annalise Frank from Cranes, who's not able to be here today. She said she's not aware of concerns being raised previously regarding the federal effort, and wanted to know if they had been raised and she missed it, or if it's just coming up now, and why now?
I don't think
No,
there's a
no,
single
there,
press conference.
no, so, God rest his soul, our former chair of House Oversight Committee, House Oversight Committee, Elijah Cummings, we had a number of committee hearings specifically about the cutting resources. Well, we were hearing on the ground, too, that they were not hiring up as they were supposed to be planning to hire up. We heard this again prior to the pandemic. And if I remember voting to hold, to send a subpoena out and also hold those in contempt that were responsible, again, not responding to the United States Congress about information that we needed to decide what further action was required to, again, making sure. And we actually had one specifically focused on hardest hit communities, specifically on what resources were being dispensed. We gave you more money this time to do it. What are you doing? And they didn't seem to have the answers. They kept saying, we're online now. And I said, this is communities that don't have broadband internet. This is communities that you're talking about that you can't just say go online. As we all see during the pandemic, what our Detroit Public School District did and other school districts, I mean, people, this is not the answer. That's not what the intent of Congress was when dispensing more resources, again, to implement in cities like Detroit, so. But yes, I can send, if you want, connect us, John, and I'll send her more information, and also the number of letters that we have signed on about the U.S. Census and hardest hit communities.
I don't think we've had a census news conference where we didn't talk about the fact we're concerned about there's no Detroit office. We need people to go onto the site, fill the jobs. We don't have enough enumerators. It has been a constant subject of communication, and it's been a deep concern all summer and fall. It would have been interesting to know if they had gone through October, if they could have fixed it. But unfortunately, we don't know because they artificially cut the count short.
Okay, and just one last piece of housekeeping. I'm not sure if it came up earlier, but maybe to reiterate, is there a time frame for this information gathering process?
Well, if you call us in the next week, it'll get us going, but the anticipation is this: at the moment, the plan is for the Census Bureau to release a count on December 31st. That may or may not change. There's all kinds of legal motions going on, and at the moment, we think that's the date we will get an initial number. And if we believe the initial number is false, we, as every other city does, has an appeal right. So our plan is, if you can get us information in the next week, we are going to follow up with you. We are going to build the case, and we are going to be prepared to come out, not with a bunch of name-calling or a bunch of political attacks. We are going to come out with a whole series of facts to say, this is exactly why we think this is done. And that's why the Congress member and I are here. We aren't going to base this on anything except facts, but we don't have the facts without you. So please, if you are an enumerator, call, tell us your story.
All right, that's it. No more questions.